start the live stream now. You are live.
Thank you for everyone for participating. I am Congressman Ted Lieu, holding this Facebook Live event on the rise of violence against the Asian American community, as well as many communities, including also the Jewish American community. And we have three amazing guests with us today. So I'm going to introduce our three guests. I'm also going to give a short statement about what I've seen in the last year since this pandemic started, and then we're going to have questions and answers with our three guests. So we have with us Professor Jerry Kang. He is the Distinguished Professor of Law, Distinguished Professor of Asian American Studies, and the inaugural Korean Times Hanku Ilbo Endowed Chair in Korean American Studies and Law. He previously was UCLA's founding Vice Chancellor for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and completed a 5-year mission to build equity for all. We also have with us Jihi Ha. Jihi serves as the Asian Pacific Islander Public Affairs Commissioner for the state of California. She is also the Vice Chair of PAFCO and co-founder of Pete's Seafood, where she oversees company marketing, strategic planning, and new business development. And Jihi is also an active life trustee for public radio station, Southern California Public Radio. And we have with us Jeffrey Abrams, who is the director of ADL's Los Angeles Regional Office. Mr. Abrams is a Los Angeles native. He has also been an attorney and mediator for more than 25 years and has extensive experience in the Jewish, civic, and philanthropic communities, having served as a director trustee of Bethesda Legal Services, the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles, and the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. So we have three amazing speakers with us today. And before I go to question and answer, let me just give you my perspective of what's been happening. So we know there has been a rise in hate crimes against Asian American community. The nonprofit Stop AAPI Hate has been tracking hate incidents since the beginning of this pandemic, and we're at nearly 3,800 incidents since last March. This is also severely underreported because many people don't actually report hate crimes or hate incidents, nor do they know where to report those incidents to. But even with the reporting we have now, it is a shocking number of incidents. And according to other studies, this represents about a 150% rise in hate crimes in 2020 against the Asian American community. We also know that this is not new to the Asian American community. Whenever America fears some sort of external threat, oftentimes our country unfortunately scapegoats minority communities. So we've had the whole yellow peril hysteria earlier in our country's history, followed by the Chinese Exclusion Act. And then we had the internment of over 120,000 Americans of Japanese descent. And then 1980s, when America feared the rise of Japan, you had additional hate crimes, including the murder of Vincent Chen in Detroit. And then we now have this pandemic where, again, you have increases in hate crimes and hate incidents against the Asian American community. So in Congress, to try and fight back, I'm a co-author of numerous pieces of legislation. One would create a National Hate Crimes Commission. Another would create a position within the Department of Justice to address hate crimes and devote more resources to our law enforcement and prosecutors. In addition, last year I wrote a letter to then Attorney General Bill Barr, signed by 150 bipartisan members of Congress, asking him and the Department of Justice to do more on hate crimes. Unfortunately, their former administration ignored that letter. We have a new administration now, and I'm very pleased that President Biden already signed an executive order to crack down on hate crimes. And we have a new Attorney General that we're going to send another letter to, and I expect the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, will be much more responsive to these issues. So now I'm going to have each of our three witnesses give some brief opening remarks, and then we're going to go to questions and answers. And we'll start off with Professor Kang.
So Congressman Lieu, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your leadership on these and other critically important issues. In my 5 minutes, I'm going to make 4 points. The danger with law professors is that we tend to be verbose, so I'll go fast. So point number one, I think we have to recognize how hate crimes actually just work. And almost always there are two components: racial blame and racial dehumanization, right? It could be, again, ethnic, religious, or other kinds of things. I'm focusing on race right now, but there has to be blame, like you're the problem. And then there has to be dehumanization. You're not fully human, so I can batter you, push you, shove you to the ground, shoot you. And so I want to think about blame and dehumanization. That's point number one. Point number two is an insight that Gordon Allport, a world-class psychologist back in the 1950s, said. He said the following: violence is always an outgrowth of milder states of mind, right? So what I'm trying to suggest is that how we think about human beings, actually, as subtle as it might be just a joke, actually is the substrate from which violence can happen. So we as Asians are blamed. We are viewed as perpetually foreign. We are viewed as the unfair competitor, whether it be in the auto industry in the late 80s as described, or maybe in colleges studying too much in the libraries, or with the rise of China's influence in terms of the military, or that we're scapegoated for a virus in ways that we can talk about, obviously, in greater detail soon. We are also dehumanized, like we all look alike, right? That's the claim. We're fungible, we're foreign, we're submissive, and all through media, I think it's fair to say that we are caricatured. Our complexity as full human beings are not shown. It's generally a caricature, whether it's Crazy Rich Asians as the model, which again was actually a movie that seemed to actually unpack the different levels, but the top line understandings of the Asian body, of the Asian human being, tends to be caricature. Number three, the past is not the past. Where do these stereotypes come from? Because people think, oh, no, Asians, we're a monolithic model minority. Everything's going well for us. And I want to suggest that's not the case. The stereotypes of us being foreign, sort of unfair competitors, persist, and they come actually from a certain past. And anyone who knows something about Asian American history, and Congressman Lieu, you referred to things like the Chinese Exclusion Act and the internment, makes very clear that by force of, frankly, federal law, you had racial bars that didn't let bodies like mine come in, right? Back in 1875, there was the Page Act that really targeted Chinese women as lewd or debauched women that actually tried to screen them out as prostitutes. In 1882 and 1884, we had Chinese Exclusion Acts that saw bodies like mine as, essentially robots. We were, quote, industrious and docile, useful in constructing roads, draining marshes, wherever outdoor labor was required. That's how Supreme Court justices described us. And when our usefulness ended, we were supposed to be kicked out. So the past actually leaves a sediment even on today. And I want to, in part because I'm an implicit bias scholar, I can show you modern data that suggests that the implicit stereotypes, even if you don't recognize you have them, that associates this kind of face with a foreigner versus American still persists. So again, how we see people and humanize people matters. Fourth and last point that I'll make, because no doubt my time is on, is just to say it's on us. I mean, when hard things happen, it's natural for us to to call up Ted Lieu's office and say, why don't you solve the problem? Or why doesn't the president solve the problem? And don't get me wrong, having strong leadership within government makes all the difference. But it's also true that each of us as individuals and as players in our various institutions have a responsibility. So think about all the social and cultural reforms that are possible if you're in media, social media, how you interact with each other as a fellow citizen. All of this matters in how we stop the blame and how we stop the dehumanization. And one thing that I want to try to unpack is how we engage in self-critique, because whenever there are these problems, it's very easy to be quite righteous. And especially with hate crimes, it's very easy to see those people as the evil bad apples. But the truth is, if we engage in self-critique, even though not everyone is equally guilty, no one is entirely innocent. And I think for communities, including communities of color interacting with each other, to try to engage in that self-critique so that we can all become better parts of the American enterprise, I think that's a really hard challenge that I hope we can talk a little bit more about.
Thank you so much, Professor Kang. And next we'll hear from Jihi Ha.
Hi, thank you, Congressman Ted Lieu, and wonderful to see the other panelists here. I became very involved in the community as a result of the 1992 LA riots. And at that time, I was a mother of two and just getting, my life started. And to find out that, there was so much social injustice in America that, we had experienced this hate towards Korean Americans, but it wasn't really Korean Americans, right? It was really a systemic problem that America has had for a long time, and it keeps rising up at different points, and at different times in our history, we see people being scapegoated. So I think Jerry spoke about this, but in the 21st century, I think it's important to remember that America has so many issues with respect to trust. And I think we have to deal with that as a primary problem, is that when we have these multicultural communities, we are not sure who to trust and what to trust. And when we have social media and it is at a pinnacle of misinformation, then it's very easy to find ways to point fingers and start doing the blame game. So I think what we need to do, and I think Jerry alluded to this, is to self-reflect on who is America, what is America, who makes up America, and why is America, having these issues. And I think it is that there is this sense of false fear that certain groups are responsible for certain things. And I think when you look at history, we look at the fact that we've, targeted Jewish Americans, we've targeted Muslim Americans, we've targeted women for a long time, we've targeted African Americans, Hispanic Americans, but none of these things are going to give us the answer. So I do think that if we can start to think in terms of building trust amongst each other and making sure that we have good quality information, and that's one of the reasons why we became very involved in public media, is because we understood that the erosion of news and information in a quality fashion was becoming a major problem, especially in the local communities. So we believe that there's an answer, and it's not a short answer, but we do believe that if we spend more time in making sure our local communities get accurate information, accurate news, and ways in which to engage civically, then we will have some basic steps in getting us back to where we need to be, which is a country of multicultural ethnicities. We have always been a country of immigrants, and we will always continue to be the beacon of hope if we continue to believe in each other. And Congressman Ted Lieu, you are an example of that hope, and the fact that our future is going to be better if we have faith in this process. So my 3 points are: number one, we're a multicultural community. Number two, we Asian Americans are part of that, and we will always be a part of it. We're not going anywhere. This is our home. I'm a grandmother, and my grandchildren will be continuing to live here, vote here, and be educated here. And that at the end of the day, that we are here to make this community better. And so thank you, Congressman Ted Lieu, for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Jihi, for your terrific presentation. And now we'll have Mr. Abrams.
Thank you so much. And it's such a wonderful opportunity to learn from Jerry and Jihi, and all of us learn together. And Congressman Lieu, I really want to thank you for the opportunity here today, but I also want to take the opportunity to thank you for your work as co-chair of the bipartisan House Task Force on Anti-Semitism. You, along with Grace Ming, your colleague, it's extraordinary. Look at that. Take pause for a moment, those who are listening. 2 Asian Americans who are chairing the House Task Force on anti-Semitism. And it's such a beautiful reflection, really, of what ADL has been about since we were founded in 1913. From the very start, it was to, one, secure and stop the defamation, rather, of the Jewish people, and at the same time, secure justice and fair treatment for all. We recognized from the very start, the Jewish community, we could not be safe if other communities were not safe, and other communities could not be safe if the Jewish community was not safe. And so we have worked together and continue to work together. And this moment of the rise in anti-Asian hate, crimes, incidents, discrimination, is a moment that we have all come together. And unfortunately, what we've all seen, the Jewish and Asian community, is a proliferation of these hateful messages targeting our communities. And it's being driven by extremists who are using social media, and in the case of both of our communities, to spread age-old conspiracies, age-old blood libel types conspiracies regarding the Jewish community, and conspiracies tied to COVID-19. And what we've seen is this dramatic rise. We, ADL, just released our online hate and harassment survey. It's the third year in a row that we've done a survey. And what we found was 41% of people are subject to hateful messages online. In the Jewish community, this is the third year we've done it, we saw an uptick from 33% to 36%. But who was the community? Which was the community who saw the most dramatic increase? It's the Asian community. In 1 year, from 11% to 17%, experiencing some form of online hate and harassment. What we've done at ADL, following the incidents of January 6th, is we have an all-of-agency approach to extremism called PROTECT. And we're working with the military, with law enforcement, to root out the extremism from their midst, which affects all of our communities. We're working in state legislatures, and working, as Congressman Lieu knows, with Congress. And so one of the things, and I certainly would love to get into more detail, is one of the things we urge everyone to do is support House Bill 151, HR 151. And I pulled it today. And it really is an extraordinary, co-sponsored by Representative Lieu, thank you, introduced by Representative Ming. And it's an extraordinary resolution that is the House of Representatives, we the people, condemn, denounce anti-Asian sentiments. We the people condemn all manifestations and expressions of racism. And there's a call to action, which Representative Lieu talked about. We need more data. We need more incident reporting. And so at ADL, we're very proud to stand here to assist, to use our best resources. And so where we stand today, and I'm looking forward to the conversation, is we're in the middle of a moment. The trust between our communities has been built up over many, many years. It's reflected in, frankly, Representative Lieu, the fact that you are the co-chair of this committee is years, decades of relationship, which is where trust is created. And so this is a moment when we have an opportunity to rise again together. And so ADL is here to do that. We have on our website opportunities for people to participate. People want to do something. And at the end of our presentation, I'll be happy to share some of those resources.
Thank you so much. And let me first say again that this is a town hall with 3 amazing witnesses, and it's done in conjunction with the Day of Action. And for folks who want to help participate, if you're going to do any social media posts, please consider using #StopAsianHate. And this Facebook town hall not only is being watched by people right now, but it's also going to be sent out after this is done. It's being recorded. It'll be sent out to millions of people on social media. I don't know if I told you that, Jeffrey, Jerry, and Jihi, by the way, but that's going to happen too. And again, if anyone wants to let your voices be heard and you want to participate or do things on social media, again, please use the #StopAsianHate. So with that, I do want to ask my first question to Mr. Abrams. So Asian Americans have seen an increase in hate crimes, particularly since the pandemic started. However, in the last 4 years, Jewish Americans have actually seen a surge in hate crimes as well against the Jewish American community. And in sort of ADL's research and reports, do you believe there's a link to political rhetoric and hate rhetoric and actual hate incidents or hate crimes?
There really is no question. The data is astounding over the last really 5 years. So we have seen murderous incidents in Pittsburgh and Poway. And at ADL, what we use is a pyramid of hatred. And we talk about, it starts with biased attitudes, and then it progresses up the pyramid: acts of bias, discrimination, bias motivated violence, murder. And so the use of these terms unquestionably leads to normalization at the very bottom rung. And that's also reflected in the survey we just released, online hate and harassment. It starts with the normalization. It starts with words. Words matter. Leadership matters. And so the data, the empirical, it's very clear. The rise in incidents has increased, anti-Semitic incidents versus, and to be clarified, not necessarily crimes as categorized by the current state of the law, incidents. 2019, we've studied this for 40 years. It's the highest on record of anti-Semitic incidents in this country. And we know that Stop AIPI is tracking these incidents. And so we are sort of working and providing our good resources so that the data means something. But words matter, Congressman. Leadership matters. And so our hope is, and it's in combination with also how words are spread. So the impact of social media is dramatic. When the President Trump was kicked off of social media, there was an immediate decline, in some of the worst offenders in the extremist space. They disappeared. Now, they might have disappeared to other platforms, but it matters. And so does the social media and how these words are spread.
Thank you. It does occur to me that Jewish Americans and Asian Americans do get attacked along a particular form of discrimination, which is somehow that we're not loyal to America, that we've got dual loyalties to a foreign country, that we're foreigners, we're not of this country, we're second-class citizens. So Professor Kang, I have a question for you because you did mention sort of the foreigner syndrome issue. What do you think would be the best way to push back on that? How do we get people to not confuse the actions of a foreign country with Americans of Asian descent? That's exactly what happened with the Japanese American internment. It's partly what's happening now. And do you have any recommendations or advice on that?
Yeah, hey, that's a terrific question. In some ways, it's a social cultural education project. And I want to suggest that, of course, we should all learn more about everyone's histories, including our own. But maybe we can start with a very simple, nutritional maxim. There's this line: you are what you eat. It's also true that you are what you see. And we see things not only individually back, especially before COVID days when we could shake each other's hands and meet each other over dinner, but over media. And so what we really need to do is to see examples that are a little bit counter to type, that are unexpected, that actually has this kind of face associated with something that seems very American, very ordinary. I don't mean that every single person you take who is a racial minority is some sort of leading man, superhero, or other kinds of things. But if the general gist of your experience is just to see caricatures, if all that you see of Asians are, say, first generation elderly immigrants because of where you live or where you might eat, or if you don't have any friends that look like us, who have all the human foibles and challenges and issues, regardless of generation, I think that's a problem. So individually, individually, we have to curate complexity, not caricature. And that means it's on all of us to individually figure out, what do our social circles actually look like? Who are the last 5 people you've had over for dinner back when that was a thing? And ask yourself, how is it that we lead such segregated lives? And then I think in terms of how we tell each other's stories, whether we laugh at something and create therefore a market demand for certain kinds of humor or certain kinds of performances, we should really try to figure out, are we actually curating our experiences even as we see them? So generally speaking, I think we are what we see. And if we see this kind of face as always foreign, as therefore disloyal, and subject to, again, anxiety about whether they are with us or against us, anytime there's an exogenous foreign shock between any Asian power and the United States, the more we actually break bread with and actually like argue with and befriend and also be teammates with other folks, right? And this is across folks of color, Jews, Asians, like that is the project. And you cannot expect other people to do it. You got to do it yourself. And it's not only social media, it's actually doing the heavy work, the heavy lifting necessary to actually go out of our comfort zones and actually humanize people who seem other.
Professor Kang, those are some great points. And, you know, it makes me now think about sort of the role that media and entertainment industry can also play. So during the pandemic, my wife and I ended up watching a number of series on Netflix and Amazon Prime and so on. So one of them was actually Designated Survivor. And one of the reasons we loved it is because one of the central characters, in addition to it being about politics, was also that one of the central characters was a totally kick-ass FBI agent who happened to be an Asian American female. And so we watched that show and really enjoyed it. I also remember recently seeing an Allstate insurance commercial where it was sort of 2 race cars on this track, one of whom is being driven by an Asian female. And I made a remark to my wife, I said, well, that's not something you see every day. And it just sort of struck me as quite interesting. So I know that news organizations have a big role to play in this. And Jihi, I know you've been very involved with Southern California Public Radio. And I believe they also did make efforts to highlight Asian Americans. Can you discuss a little bit about what they did?
So before the pandemic and before the anti-hate rhetoric had taken, off, KPCC and Southern California Public Radio, American Public Media Group, has been very much at the forefront of telling Asian American stories and making sure that our stories were coming through in terms of our experience, not the way sort of the other communities were viewing us, but the way that we are actually living through those stories. And I think that's really important, to tell the stories from our vantage point, because I think what happens with Asian Americans is our stories being told through the eyes of other people who view us in a certain way. And I think that is really the major crux of our issues is, we don't have enough of us out there telling our story. They're not asking us. For instance, during the election period, there was hardly any news organizations that had commentators that were Asian American. And so our stories always being told through the eyes of other people, and no one is checking back with us and saying, did we get the story right? Are we telling it in terms of the way you are experiencing it? So I think media has an obligation to make us be a part of the people who are telling the story. And I think KPCC is one of those people who really have embraced that approach in telling the story through the experience of those who are going through it. And so that's what we're doing. And I think, National Public Radio is obviously, because we're one of the sister radio stations, they're also doing that as well. So I think there is an initiative to do that. But like Jerry said, Asians have an obligation to call out people when they're telling the story inaccurately. So we also have to put that burden on ourselves.
That's a great point, Jihi. And I have to just share with you how annoying it is to have to read polls and articles, and they'll break out the polls, white, Black, Latino, and not have Asian there. And the number of times I have to sort of call media reporters and publishers and so on and try to get them to fix that. I'll give you a very good example. The publication The Hill a couple of days ago published an article about how a poll came out showing that Governor Newsom was doing well in this recall effort and that voters were likely to support him. And then they broke it out by white, Latino, and Afro-American. Now, as anyone in California knows, Asian Americans are the second largest minority group. They completely didn't mention Asian Americans anywhere in that breakout. So I criticized The Hill and, publicly told them to do better. And then to The Hill's credit, they eventually updated the story and fixed it. It also took an Asian American reporter at The Hill who hadn't written the story to go ahead and get the editor corrected. So it's just helpful, to have Asian Americans in media and actually in all walks of life. And one of the things you may have noticed is you do see now more Asian Americans on these news shows as guests and even as paid commentators. And one reason is because the Congressional Asian Pacific Caucus, every year we would hold meetings with network executives from various networks and basically tell them they need to do better in terms of diversifying their guest lineup, their hosts, their paid commentators. And now we're starting to see that starting to happen. So a lot of this isn't just sort of random and just coincidence. It does take concerted efforts by community groups and elected officials and so on. So I actually have another question for Professor Kang. You may have seen that the California Department of Education recently recommended that ethnic studies be taught in high school. What is your sense of that?
So I haven't looked at that particular recommendation. I know that different states have done different versions of this. Here's my take on it. Like full disclaimer, I'm a professor of Asian American Studies as well. And so I guess that's partly what I do. When some people, and I'm always trying to reach people who are kind of in the persuadable middle. Like I love talking to the choir, but I want to talk to people whom I genuinely disagree and sincerely. Sometimes when people hear, oh, you should teach ethnic studies, like, oh, well, that's just a bunch of propaganda. You're going to be blaming America. Like, why are you, like, can't we all be Americans? I don't see race. I don't see color. And I have to say, I understand those impulses, right? People want to do the right thing, want to get beyond like tribalism of all different sorts. But I think there's overwhelming evidence that says that actually it's impossible for us not to see race, ethnicity, religion, the really important social categories by which we divide each other. And even when we think of ourselves as being entirely fair and square in terms of our feelings and our beliefs, there's just a lot of baggage that we just actually see through our eyes and deposit in our brains that are in some ways implicit. And so one of the benefits of actually studying something like intentionally, ethnic studies, is to actually mindfully kind of change what we know about ourselves. And if you tell people, hey, you should learn something about different groups that are really important to the American experiment, and they include different races and different ethnicities, what you find out is oftentimes shocking things about our own country. Like most people don't know that there was just a federal law that said you could not naturalize and become a US citizen, no matter how good a guy or gal you were. You could not naturalize if you were not white or a person of African descent after the Civil War. For people of Asian descent, it started in 1943. I'm Korean. Not until 1952 could my people actually become US citizens simply because of the race. That's in the 50s. People are usually kind of shocked by that. Like, whoa, who knew that was a thing? But in part by just teaching a little bit about the past, we all become better Americans because we recognize, oh, we've seen this before. The past has a connection to the present. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is I think learning more generally is a good thing. And actually, instead of trying desperately to be colorblind, even though in some cases we understand why that might be a good thing, generally speaking, being more conscious of the differences and our different histories makes us more mindful of how we can actually build a fairer society. So I generally encourage it. And to the extent that people feel like it's forcing a particular kind of ideology down people's throats, when it's done well at its best, that is not the case. It just allows us to be more who we claim to be as Americans, which is building up a society that gives everyone a fair shot and respectful of our authentic communities.
Thank you for those insightful comments. And I have a question for you, Mr. Abrams. It strikes me that before you get to the point where someone commits an actual hate crime, or before someone actually verbalizes some hateful thing that they actually say to someone, that doesn't just sort of happen because someone wakes up one day and decides to do this. It seems like it's something that's built up over time. And I'm just wondering, in ADL's sort of advocacy and research, what sorts of policies or interventions or programs have you seen that works to keep people from getting to that point, that actually can sort of reverse or mitigate some people's hateful views and get them to change?
Well, I appreciate it. So picking up a bit on Professor Kang's is, we're trying to find that middle point where people's actions still can be corrected. So let's start at the base level, which is education for children. So we have programs that go into schools. One is for students, No Place for Hate. Another is called A World of Difference. Educators, staff, faculty, to provide them with the tools so they have the ability to have some sort of intervention, to build the foundation blocks for healthy relationships with the other. One of the things we've recently done, and to pick up on Jihi's point, is telling our own story, is a program called BINA, which is an online curriculum. It's a 1-hour online curriculum for high schoolers. It tells about the American Jewish experience. It's not for Jewish kids. It's for non-Jewish kids. So they have the opportunity to learn more. These are some of the foundational points. Now let's advance to adults who are online. So one of the things that we have been trying to do, and we partnered with an organization called Moonshot, is when people put in search terms that could lead them to extremist content, it's redirected. So in other words, we're trying to find these intervention points so that before it rises to the point of some sort of actual conduct, we're able to help guide otherwise. And then is the other, which is those who are already committed to an extremist ideology. Well, we have a center of excellence in our Center on Extremism. Prior to the election, to your earlier point, we knew what was coming. We were monitoring these extremists. We were sounding the clarion call. And then when January 6th happened, as my colleague Oren Siegel, who leads the Center on Extremism, said, it was the most well-known attack on our nation in our nation's history. We knew it was coming. And then afterwards, we've worked with law enforcement, identified well over 200 of the insurrectionists, and helped identify a quarter of whom were extremists. So it's a continuum. We want to stop it where we can and use our resources and educational opportunities. But when it happens, we obviously have to intervene. So it's a range of resources. And really, fundamentally, it's about education, as Professor Kang said. It's exposing people to the other.
Great, thank you. I recently read an article by Jonathan Capehart. He's a MSNBC host, about Representative Andy Kim. And Congressmember Kim happens to be Korean American, and he was relaying a story about his young son who had gone to school, and a classmate kept referring to him as China boy, and say China boy to him over and over again. And his son came and relayed back to Andy, and his son didn't really understand why he was being called China boy, because he's like, I'm Korean. But also, I don't think he understood that it was a negative term necessarily, because obviously as a little kid isn't following, what's happening with China and so on. But it did strike me that, again, I think rhetoric from the, political leaders and folks at the very highest levels of government does have an effect. But I'm so curious, Jihi, I have a question for you. What would you advise to parents or grandparents as to what do they tell their children about what they're seeing right now?
Thank you for that question. And I think we grapple with this on a day-to-day basis. And I do think that when we talk to our children, we try to share with them the history that we have been exposed to by our parents, which is that we're extremely proud to be who we are. And we're very proud of the Korean history. And we're very proud of being part of the American history in terms of, the immigration story, et cetera. I think we have to lead from a position of positivity, and that, the people who are coming from the negative mindset, the scarcity mindset, that is not going to lead us to any positive outcomes. We have to come from abundance, and that the reason why everyone wants to still come to America is because of our diversity, because of the fact that all of us bring something more to the table than what it was before. And, we don't see people saying they want to go to a particular country in the East or or in Africa. They always say, I want to go to America. I want to take my kids and I want to educate my kids in America. And it's because of our, multicultural diversity and all of the things that you have brought to this country, your parents have brought to this country, what Jerry has brought to this country, what Jeff has brought to this country, that make this country extraordinary. That's the X factor. The X factor is us. It's what we bring to the table. And that is what I want to express to my half Greek, half Korean grandchild, to say, you are the one that makes this country so special. And we will continue to become the place where everyone wants to come to. 7 billion people say they want to come to America because of the fact that we are multicultural. And so I want to lead with that. And I know that, we don't have a lot more time to discuss it, but education, education, education. Information.
Congressman Lieu, can I just add just something to Jihi's really thoughtful comments? I'm going to just say two things, like being called China boy. I'm an immigrant. I have my own stories. I'm first gen, and I know what that sounds like. And even my daughter, who was born here, at UCLA, she knows what it sounds like. But just here's some history. Like China boy sounds like Chinaman, right? It was like Chinama, Chinaman. It was a compound word. It was not a flattering description of ethnicity. And even the phrase "a Chinaman's chance," that comes from a particular moment in history where the Chinese laborers were used as miners, and they would be brought down in buckets with dynamite to actually blow out pieces where they could mine, and the chances they would make it up as the dynamite went off, it was a Chinaman's chance of survival. So there is some reason why history might influence the meaning of a word, even if the word seems no big deal. Knowing a little bit more recognizes there is an impact to what these things say. The second thing that I want to suggest outside of history is kind of how we teach. So I'm going to give the flip side of what Jihi says, education, and how we could actually set better examples when we're talking to our own communities or to others. Andrew Meltzoff is a great scholar at the University of Washington. He's done lots of developmental psychological work, and he says something that is really, I think, quite powerful. He says bias is caught, not taught. Bias is caught, not taught. And there's beautiful experiments where you can see how quickly kids at the ages of 3 and 4 immediately pick up on how adults, especially their parents, treat other people with fear, with warmth, with respect. So even if you teach the right things, oh, be great, be colorblind, be American, whatever it is, if in truth the way you treat other people is not with respect and warmth, with fear and reservation instead of the kindness that you normally show your in-group, that's how we are teaching. We're teaching by examples just as much as we're teaching, frankly, through words. And this is what I mean by saying it's also on us, because bias is caught, not taught. And so even as we work up on the teaching in any formal bookish sense, we have to recognize as parents, as adults, as leaders, if we don't actually demonstrate genuine respect and warmth towards people who might seem a little different, who might be marked as other, then we're failing, and it is on us.
Those are some great points. Thank you. So I'm going to ask one last question to all of you. It's the same question, which is, even during these challenging times, what do you find to be hopeful? So I'm actually going to answer that question first, and then I'll call on each of you. First of all, number one, by the way, UCLA is in a Sweet 16, so yay for that. Number two, if you look at the growth of the Asian American community, it is extraordinary. Since 2000, the number of Asian American eligible voters has more than doubled. We also know that there are now more immigrants from Asia to the United States than any other region in the world. So this growth is continuing to accelerate. And according to Pew Research, they project that by 2055, Asian Americans will be the largest immigrant group in the United States. And so I think those are hopeful numbers that show that America continues to be, as Jihi said, the place where everyone wants to come. No one actually sort of, wakes up in the morning and says, hey, I'd like to go to Moscow, right? It doesn't really, people don't think that way. So you do have America continuing to attract people from all over the world, and it renews our country. And we see some tremendous growth numbers for the Asian American community. And I do look forward to continuing to have a more perfect union in our country. So Jihi, let me ask you that question. What do you find hopeful during these times?
Well, just the recent events post 2020 elections, when Asian Americans came out in bigger numbers than I think I've ever seen before, in states that you wouldn't think that they were really residing in, we made the difference in the election of our president, Joe Biden. That to me was the biggest biggest thing that I could see in terms of Asian Americans feeling like this is their country, this is their president, this is their community. They were going to make the difference. And for me, that was the biggest hopeful thing. And the second biggest hopeful thing, I think, is the collaboration between the various different minority groups that happened with Black Lives Matter. And that we had a worldwide coming together and saying, we respect human rights. These are not just African American rights. These are not Asian American rights. These are human rights. And that at the end of all of this, that there's a binding element that brings us all together. And that it is not that we are, just Americans. We are human beings, and we care about the community. We care about the climate change. We care about our children's rights. We care about education, and we care about the earth. And I think that awareness and awakening is happening. And I think while it may sometimes feel like we're going one step backwards to go two steps forward, we are going forward and we're going to move ahead. So thank you so much for your leadership. You inspire me every single day to stay engaged, to be positive, to, really invest my time and my resources to making our country better. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jihi. And just a quick follow-up on your point, in the swing state of Georgia, there was an exit poll done, and it had a pretty amazing statistic, which showed that about 50% of the Asian American voters who voted in 2020 had not voted in 2016. So you saw this stunning increase in participation among Asian American voters. And I think one reason is because the community was very aware that the former president was using racist phrases and attacking the community and mocking the community. And that was having a pronounced effect on hate incidents. And you saw Asian Americans turn out. And the exit polls also show that roughly 2/3 supported Joe Biden. So Mr. Abrams, what do you find hopeful?
Well, I'm very encouraged and hopeful by this very conversation. It really is quite extraordinary. And as I began to know that two Asian Americans are co-chairing our House task force to combat anti-Semitism, it's reflective that we're coming together. This weekend is Passover, the Jewish holiday of Passover. It's actually the most celebrated holiday, Jewish holiday of all. And it's a story of the Jewish people being strangers in a strange land, of leaving, of redemption ultimately. And the lesson is to take care of the widow, the orphan, the stranger, because we were in that position once. And it really is a reminder each and every year, and really for many of us on a daily basis, that we are here to welcome each other. We are stronger by working together. And it really is a wonderful time of year to know that we return to it time and time again. It ends with, I will see you next year in Jerusalem, because it's a story that never ends. It's perpetual. And so just as we have perpetual challenges, we also have perpetual opportunity. And so thank you for this opportunity today. Thank you for the opportunity to learn with my colleagues. And we wish everybody, those who enjoy, a wonderful Passover, and to those who celebrate a joyous Easter as well. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, Ms. Abrams. And just a real quick follow-up question. You had earlier mentioned that there's a 1-hour video that people can watch about the Jewish American experience. Is that something that you need a teacher facilitator? Or is that something someone can just do by themselves? And how would they do that?
Right now, it's a curriculum called Bina, which is going to be offered through schools. It's something we beta tested last year and are rolling out this year through schools. But visit our website. There's a tremendous number of resources, and including on the issues that we've discussed today. There's an opportunity to petition your congressperson about the resolutions that matter, an opportunity to join social media campaigns. People want to do something. And so this is something everyone can do. So we appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you. And your measure of resolutions reminds me that my better half, my wife, Betty, is president of the Torrance School Board. And at their last school board meeting, she wrote and got passed a resolution on Asian American hate crimes and how the school district needs to have a safe, secure environment for all the students. And not only did it pass the Torrance School Board, but now other school boards are reaching out for copies of that resolution. They're going to look at doing similar versions.
And just to add one thing,
raising awareness and
just to add one thing to that, if I may, resolutions matter, folks. We have a resolution that was just introduced in the LA City Council condemning all forms of extremism. These matter. So thank you very much. We'll be reaching out about the Torrance School Board as well. So wonderful.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Professor Kang, you get the last word.
Thank you again. This has been an outstanding conversation. You know, am I optimistic? I'm cautiously optimistic, maybe for two reasons. One, I've just been in more honest conversations, and not just amongst friends or colleagues or academic, pointy head types, but also people out in corporate America, just trying to figure out what the right thing is to do. I mean, the social movement that was Black Lives Matter, that is Black Lives Matter, has had a huge impact across the board. No matter how cynical you are and skeptical you are, it has had a change in how we talk. And that's going to have repercussions on how we talk about all kinds of social movements and challenges, including Me Too, thinking about all these things, including anti anti-Asian hate. And I just see more honest conversations. And I want to underscore how significant it is that people are humble enough to recognize when we screw up. I screw up all the time, and what it means to have a humble, honest conversation matters a lot, and I see more of it. And for that, I'm a little bit hopeful. The second and last thing is, there are themes in those conversations that I call going beyond self-interest. I realize that life is hard. We've got to scramble to make ends meet, take care of ourselves and our families. But if American exceptionalism is worthy of anything, it is because we have always decided to go beyond narrow conceptions of self-interest. It's not that we must and always will be great. It's because we make choices in each generation to go beyond self-interest, even when it's really hard. And that's what makes us worthy of our exceptional weight and power. I see some of that now, and that brings me a little bit of joy and some hope for the future.
Thank you so much. And let me thank again, Jeffrey, Jerry, and Jihi for your wonderful insights and comments today. And thank all of you for watching this Facebook Live Town Hall. And again, if you're going to do any social media today, please use the hashtag #StopAsianHate. And this will be recorded and also put out on social media as well. So please stay safe out there. And thank you again for participating. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.